In a single moment, the fragile voice of a child cracked through the flawless world of a billionaire, uncovering a truth sharp enough to end his life. Nestled among the quiet hills stood the Hayes estate, an empire not laid in stone but in relentless ambition. At its core was Walter Hayes, a man whose vast fortune concealed more shadows than treasures. His days unfolded with mechanical precisions: breakfast at dawn, endless meetings, and always without exception tea at 3 sharp. But on one deceptively ordinary afternoon, that rhythm collapsed. A maid's daughter, no older than 9, caught sight of something so brief it could have been mistaken for fantasy. Yet the glimpse she witnessed tied her fate to the destiny of one of the world's most powerful men. Just as Walter Hayes lifted his teacup to his lips, a small trembling cry rang out, "Don't drink that." Her words, fragile as they were, cut through the silence like glass. A child's warning was about to shake the world of wealth and secrets that Walter had so carefully built. This is the tale of how a quiet girl, carrying nothing but the weight of truth, dared to stand against a man of power. It began on a day that felt as ordinary as any other, yet it would end with a lesson burned into memory. The Hayes estate was less a home and more a kingdom etched into the rolling emerald hills. A winding drive of sunlit stone led to a mansion of breathtaking scale. Lawns were flawless, oak trees ancient, and windows so polished they seemed like portals to the sky. Inside, silence held dominion, broken only by the faint hum of a polisher in some faraway hall. The quiet was punctuated only by the measured ticking of a grandfather clock that had stood in the Hayes family for over a century. This vast domain belonged to Walter Hayes. At 74, he was a man sculpted by discipline and ambition. His wealth had not been inherited but forged, brick by brick, out of a small loan and an idea that others had once dismissed as folly. Today his name gleamed across skyscrapers and was spoken in hushed tones within boardrooms throughout the nation. Walter stood tall and lean, his full head of silver hair always combed to perfection. His pale, icy blue eyes overlooked nothing. They were the eyes of a man trained by decades of reading not just contracts but the subtler truths written across people's faces. Yet time had smoothed the sharper edges of his nature in ways no fortune could resist. The fire that had once burned bright within him had cooled into a slow, steady ember. Years earlier, he had lost his wife, and his only son had chosen a life far across the world, chasing dreams far removed from empire building. Though Walter was constantly surrounded by staff, associates, and advisors, a deep loneliness hung over him, as persistent as the morning mist that clung to his expansive lawns. His existence was anchored to a rigid routine: breakfast at 7, a walk through the gardens by 8, business calls until noon, and without fail, at precisely 3 o'clock, Walter Hayes would retreat to his sunlit study for afternoon tea. This ritual was known better than anyone by his maid, Evelyn. Evelyn, in her late 30s, carried a quiet resilience in every movement of her busy hands. She had served Mr. Hayes faithfully for 5 years, ever since her husband, a soldier, never returned from war overseas. Left with a young daughter and an avalanche of uncertainty, she discovered stability, if not solace, within the rigid order of the Hayes estate. She excelled in her role, punctual, precise, and nearly invisible. Evelyn understood that her duty was to keep the vast machinery of the mansion running without drawing notice. Her true world, however, revolved entirely around her 9-year-old daughter Khloe. Khloe was delicate as a whisper, with corn-silk hair and eyes wide and curious like a young deer's. She and her mother lived in a small, neat cottage tucked behind the main house, an existence far removed from the marble floors and glittering chandeliers of the mansion. By nature, Khloe was quiet, happiest with a book in her lap or a sketchpad in hand. To her, the great estate was less a home and more a silent museum where her mother worked. She knew the unyielding rules: stay out of sight, speak only when spoken to, and never, under any circumstance, disturb Mr. Hayes. Most days she was content within her small private world, but within her, there lived a story, a legacy whispered from her mother's lips. It was the story of her. Khloe's favorite stories were not of kings or castles, but of her great-grandfather, Corporal James Miller. He had been a soldier in a war fought long before her birth, remembered not for medals or parades, but for quiet acts of bravery. Evelyn would tell her daughter tales of the man who offered his rations to a starving family, and of the night he risked everything to drag a wounded comrade to safety. The lesson, Evelyn always reminded